I'm a lawyer, but I'm kind of an unusual lawyer. I'm not what most people perceive to be a lawyer. I've begun to realise, but there are more and more people like me evolving in the world, I think, and it's very important to encourage lawyers to start loving. So I'm a lawyer who loves. I'm a lawyer who loves the earth, and this has huge implications for how we write our laws. Actually, to go back to the original meaning of the word lawyer, it means to be a healer of the community's woes. So for me, I see this in terms of my role as a lawyer to be a healer of the earth community's woes. And that is about writing laws that put people and planet first, the health and well-being of people and planet first. So this is a journey really that I'm on myself, and it's an emergent journey. And out of that, I have proposed into the United Nations that we create an international law of ecocide to criminalize mass damage and destruction. Amazingly, it is not a crime today to cause mass damage and destruction to the earth. And for me, this is a missing international law. What is the most important laws that we have, the big international crimes, they're known as crimes against peace. And we already have 4 international crimes against peace: genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity. And I say that the 5th one, after crimes of aggression, which was just put in a couple of years ago, is ecocide. Now, this is to give legal definition to the word. The word itself has actually been around since the 70s, possibly earlier. But for me, this is about legally defining it. And I have submitted that into the United Nations as the extensive damage, destruction to, or loss of ecosystems. And that can happen in 2 ways. It can happen through human activity. So that's largely, but not entirely, corporate ecocide. So this is a dangerous industrial activity that causes mass damage and destruction. If you look at the Athabasca tar sands, unconventional tar extraction, and you ask yourself, is that causing extensive damage, destruction to a loss of ecosystems? Then your answer most likely is going to be yes. But how do you measure this? How do we actually make sense of this? How do we quantify it? Well, during wartime, we already have a test, a size, duration, or impact test that we use under the Environmental Modification Convention. So if it's 200 kilometers or more, if it knocks out an ecosystem for a season or more, which doesn't seem terribly much, but if you knock out an ecosystem, usually it takes decades, if not centuries, to replace. So if you look at knocking out the Amazon, for instance, or in fact this came out of the use of chemical warfare, if you were using Agent Orange, then you would destroy something once it was knocked out for a season, then we know that it knocks it out for a very long time indeed. So this is really taking existing law and putting in place what's missing. But it's not just that, it goes further than that. It's about the emergence of a whole new body of law called the Earth Law. There's a recognition of the protection of the Earth's right to life. We don't actually have that written in law just now, but we're working towards that, and it's recognised that this is the next step for law, where law is moving towards. This is the emergence of a whole new body of Earth law. And what it does is it fundamentally flips our existing paradigm away from the existing paradigm that puts profit first. And when we put profit first, of course, what happens is often we don't look to the consequences. Now, it is the law for a CEO and his or her directors to put the interest of the shareholders first. And that means for most transnational corporations, putting profit first. And of course, when we do that and we don't look to the consequences, then it is justification to go in and to destroy for want of profit. And if we look at most extractive, all extractive industry in truth, then it's driven by a profit-making legal mechanism rather than creating a system that's based on trusteeship laws, which is about putting the interest in the health and well-being of not just the current well-being of people and planet, but future generations. So in law this is known as intergenerational equity. to look further. So, in fact, the easiest way to explain it is if you imagine the earth as a thing, what happens is you put a price tag on it. You buy it, you sell it, you use it, you abuse it, you commoditize it. It's all about the law of property and ownership. Who has the contract? You know, a government contract between Canada and here in Norway, Statoil, to go in and extract fossil fuel. In the meantime, that process is causing mass damage and destruction. Now that's completely normalized by law. It is not illegal to cause that mass damage and destruction, what I call ecocide. So a law of ecocide, what it does, sorry, it's kind of weird space here, isn't it? So a law of ecocide is an international legal mechanism to stop that cycle of harm. Here we have a cycle of harm that is causing mass damage and destruction, which leads to, amongst other things, resource depletion, which leads then on to conflict. And actually that can lead on to war, which causes more damage and destruction, more resource depletion, more conflict, more war. And it spirals downwards. And of course, you get to a point that there's very little left, and we all end up piling in, fighting for those last few resources. So this is what Sir David King, our ex-chief scientific advisor in Britain, called the century of resource wars. Well, I disagree. It doesn't have to be that. Actually, it could be the century where we change things very dramatically, and not just the century, the decade. So by proposing an international law of ecocide into the United Nations, what I'm doing is I'm saying we can turn this paradigm around very, very fast, and law can be a very powerful lever to do this. This is really about creating the bridge into a more beautiful world. This is about creating a law that embeds intrinsic values from the very top end. So this is also about a law that, instead of looking at the earth as a thing, recognizes that the earth is a living being. The very sacredness of life itself is what is at stake here. This is recognizing the intrinsic value, not the imposed value, not the price tag. It's recognizing the interconnectedness of life. Destroy our very earth, we destroy our ability to live in peaceful enjoyment on this planet. So view the earth as a living being, and something fundamentally shifts within us, because it comes from a very different place. It comes from the heart. It comes from a recognition of our role, in Arnie Ness's words, to think dutifully and to act beautifully. Now that in law means creating a legal duty of care. And when we create a legal duty of care, what we do is we create a choice. We create a choice whereby you can either continue causing mass damage and destruction, and if that is the case, then you are held to account. And of course, each and every one of us counts in all of this. We are all valued beings in this. But if you choose to continue with something that's causing mass damage and destruction, then there is a need for accountability. At the very top end. This is about decision making that's made at the very top. The very few thousand people, the CEOs, the directors, the heads of state, the ministers, those who finance, who it's all about the flow of money. Where's the flow of money going at the moment? Into dangerous industrial activities. So this is about turning off the tap upstream, so that the flow of money goes into the innovation in the other direction. Now, I'm not anti-profit. What I'm talking about here is money that is being made out of something that's destructive. What I'm saying is I'm very pro the flow of money going into the innovation in the other direction. So this is legislation that will trigger the green economy in a very big way and will allow us to go so much further and move so much faster. So that what we're seeing here at the Alternative Mesa is no longer marginal, but actually becomes mainstream. So this is really about flipping our understanding of what we see as the norm. So the norm that we're seeing today, just because it is the norm doesn't mean that it works. In fact, we know it doesn't work. You just have to look at the Amazon and you can see it doesn't work. So this is really about creating laws that also, it's not about closing down companies. unless they choose to continue down that route. It's about creating the enabling conditions so that the dirty energy company can become the clean energy company, so that today's problem becomes tomorrow's solution. So this is fundamentally about how we downsize, and we see an endpoint and we say, okay, over a period of 5 years, we downsize all subsidies, all support, all policies that are propping up a system that we know no longer works, that's causing destruction. And at the same time, we upsize the innovation the other direction, we redirect the money into that instead. So we're pulling out subsidies here, we're putting subsidies over there, and at some point you get a crossover. So last year I was invited by a group of governments to put together a concept paper with a timeline to see how soon we could move on this. And I've given a timeline between now and 2020 where this can be tabled as an amendment to the Rome Statute, which actually has drafted in it all the existing international crimes against peace. So I'm saying all we need is an amendment. And we amend that document and we table it. We give 5 years, a transition period, an ecocide amnesty period, to allow everyone to shift into the innovation in the other direction. And this is the beauty of it. Once it gets tabled, actually, it's a momentum that starts to build, because it's just a matter of signatories to the Rome Statute, and once we get 2/3, then it becomes international law. So the most important step is to find a head of state to stand up, a signatory to the Rome Statute, to stand up and call for this. 81 people in the world can make this an international law. So this is huge. This is a game changer for the whole of civilization. It changes everything overnight. Now, it just so happens, in my humble opinion, I think the time is right to do this now. But this is really about, when civilization is ready for this. And in a way, law is playing catch up with where we, the people, are going. There is a beginning of an understanding that we cannot continue with the systems, with the economic paradigm that we're in. And our economies are based on so much damage and destruction that really it needs something, the key turner, to be inserted into that lock, to unlock that door and move forward. And so this is really what a law of ecocide is. It's a very, very crucial key that can unlock us and really allow us to step into something quite different altogether. So that concept paper, it was actually taken into every single government in the world last year. And 54 governments, legal advisors, UN ambassadors, ministers came forward over the last year asking for legal advice on this. Every government is on notice for this. No government can say they don't know about this law now and how this can fundamentally change the way we engage with the world. This is about creating the biggest job creation scheme history of humanity has ever seen. This is about skilling people up into the innovation in the other direction very fast. This is about creating the enabling conditions so that we can transform our economies very quickly as well. Now, some people say this is mad, this is so big. Actually, nobody says that anymore, interestingly. They did initially at the beginning, but in a way, you sometimes know when you're onto a good thing when people say you're mad. But now what I'm getting is an awful lot of ministers, a lot of lawyers. There's a general understanding that it needs something like this. It needs a very different thinking to turn this around. It's not about tweaking at the edges. Just increasing taxation or levying charges is not going to change this. This is about a fundamental shift in how we engage with the world. It's about making Earth our business in the fullest sense of the word. But it's about how law can act as a bridge to helping shift consciousness as well. And that may sound strange, but in fact we've done this before many times. So if you look at the abolition of slavery, what happened there, when in Britain William Wilberforce was the man who stood up and called for the end of slavery. He said 3 things had to happen. You have to pool the subsidies. Slavery was very heavily subsidized by the taxpayer, not just in Britain, but all over the world. You have to create new laws. You have to outlaw that which is wrong. and you have to create new subsidies for the innovation in the other direction to flourish. Now, he hit a wall of protests from business primarily against that, who said, look, leave it to us. We don't want any more laws. Too many laws already. We'll do this voluntarily. In fact, what we'll do is we'll create a cap, a limit to the number of slaves that can be brought in to be traded. So a cap and trade system. What we'll do is we'll tell people to use their slaves a little less. It's an energy efficiency argument. Use them a little less and then they'll be a bit happier and everyone will be fine then. But William Wilberforce was saying no. This is about breaking a cycle of harm. In and of itself, it is inherently wrong to use people by dint of their colour as commodities to buy and to sell, to use and abuse. And we're looking at a very similar paradigm here where we've enslaved the earth, if you like. We've commoditized the earth. We see the earth as a thing to buy, to sell, to use and abuse. And what William Wilberforce was saying, we have to break that cycle of harm. Literally, not do it a little less, but break it altogether. And what was the real trigger for that was the creation of the laws, because law, written law, is just a physical manifestation of intent. You're actually writing down in law where you intend society to go. Now, the abolition of slavery, nobody went out of business. Even though everyone said, you can't do this, it will lead to economic collapse. It's a necessity, the public demanded. Well, none of that came true. And in fact, that's because there was a transition period and there was assistance given, subsidies were given to, there were 300 companies that were involved directly and indirectly in the slave trade. And they were financed and given help. Some started trading in tea in China. Some became they became the policers of the seas. Poacher turns gamekeeper, if you like. So there was a great shift that happened very, very fast. In fact, the laws, the signing off of the documents, the final documents to abolish slavery, happened 2 days before William Wilberforce died. So he died a very happy man. But what was so fantastic then was that the ripples that were created right across the world. Now, if it wasn't for the abolition of slavery, we wouldn't have had the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It would have been the Universal Declaration of white man's rights. And if we didn't have the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, we wouldn't have had race discrimination legislation as well. Now, yes, we can say that we still have slavery in muted forms. We have girls shipped in from Latvia for prostitution. That's a form of slavery, absolutely. But at least Amnesty International and other organizations have tools so that they can seek justice, so they can say this is a crime, this is wrong. But myself as a lawyer, and I come from a barrister background, so I'm used to being in court. If I'm to represent the earth in court at the moment, I don't have the laws to do that. They don't exist. And this is where an international law of ecocide really comes into its own in a very big way. So that I can stand up and say, that is a crime. That must stop. It is illegal. And that's what's very important here. It's actually about how, in history and time, we get to a certain point when there's a legal phrase for this, when malum in se becomes malum prohibitum. When something is so wrong in and of itself, we prohibit it. We get to a point where we say, okay, theft is wrong, so we prohibit it, we make it a crime. Now, we still have theft. We have far less theft. Now, if you were to walk down the road and someone was to steal your bag, and you turn around to a police officer and you say, stop, that person, they've stolen my bag. And the police officer said, why should I do that? It's not a crime. You would think the world had gone mad. But hasn't the world gone mad for when I stand there and say, stop that company from destroying the earth? And I'm told, why should I do that? It's not a crime. The world has gone mad if we think that's fine. It's not, for me at least.